So I think so often when you look at who the real culprit is in distorting markets in a way that harms consumers, it ends up being the government.
Hello, welcome again to the episode in the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on a guest who knows a lot about antitrust, technology, and just markets, and is just a great person to talk to in general. And it's none other than Jessica Melugin. Jessica, welcome to the Let People Prosper show.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, great. It's really a pleasure to have you on, and we've got a lot to talk about. Before we get into all that, let me go ahead and read your bio for the audience, and then we'll jump right into it. So Jessica is a director of the Center for Technology and Innovation at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, CEI. Her research focuses on technology issues, including antitrust, online privacy, artificial intelligence, telecommunications, social media content, and net neutrality regulation, all kind of fun stuff. Her writings appear in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and a number of other places. She has been cited in the Washington Post, Politico, U.S. News, and World Report, and Variety. She is a frequent cable news, television, and radio guest. She is a 2022 and 2023 Innovators Network Foundation Antitrust and Competition Policy Fellow. That is a mouthful. And Jessica is graduated magna cum laude from Claremont McKenna College with a degree in government and art history. Her honors thesis explored the development of American antitrust law as it pertains to the Microsoft trial. She lives in Virginia's horse country with her children. So, Jessica, with all that great background, let me go ahead and ask you the first question I do every guest. Why do you do what you do every day?
Oh, gosh. Well, without taking anyone down the rabbit hole of psychology too much here, I think it might have started. I grew up, my family had a family business in Southern California, a manufacturing business. So that's where I spent a lot of my downtime. That's kind of what I knew growing up. And also, just because of the time, I was also being sort of baked in the Reagan 80s environment. So I think that good ideas were prominent then. And I think that those ideas made a lot of sense to someone who was seeing firsthand how overregulation was hurting not just my family's business, but the people who worked for my family. Mm-hmm. So it's one thing to read about, the harm that raising minimum wage does. It's another thing when you hear your parents say they have to, fire 6 people because of that. So I think I was kind of baked in it in the national political way, but also at home. And so it always interested me. An overdeveloped sense of justice, I guess, would be the uncharitable way of describing people like myself who care about getting the rule of law right and the economic environment correct. And then when I went on to Claremont McKenna, obviously that was an amazing environment to learn all of the foundations of that thinking. And I actually was an intern during college at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. And then I guess I never got any other ideas. So, here I am.
I love it. And for the audience, she's very funny. Anyway, it's always a pleasure to talk with her. So Jessica, with all that background and everything, what's your philosophical bent? Like, are there certain economists or certain readers that helped you get to where you're at today? Tell us a little bit about your philosophy.
Well, I certainly had a lot of real life mentors and continue to be very grateful for those in my professional life. Starting at Claremont McKenna, Professor Jack Pitney was like, wow, here's a real person who thinks this, like a tenured, important person who thinks the way that I do. So that was kind of a great foundation. And he exposed me to so many of all the classics we on this side of, it's not even the side of the aisle. I don't know where we are in the third dimension of free market economics. Yeah. But I think as a CEI employee, I'm obligated to admit Hayek's a big one. Yeah. But that's just kind of in the water here. I'm a big Coase fan. What? It's not that I disagree with the Ayn Rand crowd. It's just that it feels a little pop culture for me. I might be the only one in America to say Ayn Rand is too mainstream. Sounds ridiculous as it's coming out of my mouth. But I do enjoy, the law and economics framework. So I've been lucky enough to be exposed to all of that at a pretty early age.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, Hayek is one of my favorites. It's one of the books that I have sitting over here. Milton Friedman, a lot of good ones that are out there. Thomas Sowell is another big one for me as well.
Thomas Sowell, yes. My mom gave me a Conflict of Visions when I was, 12 or 13. Yeah. And I don't know if you've ever read something where you think, oh my gosh, it's like they're reading how my brain is wired. Yeah. You're like, it's like you're getting it back from how you think about the world and how you see the world. So Thomas Sowell, we go way back. He's never heard of me, but I have been a big fan for a very long time. And that was definitely, not the coolest story to tell in public. Yeah. I realize that now, being a tween and being into Thomas Sowell, but
it's awesome.
There you have it.
Yeah, he's the man. He's the man who's still kicking it. He's still writing books, which is fantastic.
Oh my gosh. Thank goodness for him.
Yes.
Thank goodness. The voice of reason.
I agree. Okay. Now, and then you got on this journey with COAS and you're thinking of regulations and everything else. Regulations also isn't that sexy of an issue compared to taxes and spending and debt. People like to talk about those things. What got you into regulations? Because to me, regulations, right, is just a hidden tax. It's very costly for all of us. That hits all of us all the time, and we just don't see it. But what got you into it? I know you said something about your family, but are there any other interesting insights there?
Yeah, I think that's where it started, right? At that family business where you see, especially, in Southern California, I got a chance to observe plenty of overregulation. Yeah. And then I think by the time I got to college, and I was very interested in the philosophical part of it, but for some reason I didn't pursue the law degree. But also I knew I wasn't good enough with numbers to be a straight economist. Mm-hmm. So I think that puts you in this space of the law and economics mishmash. Yeah. And I don't know, regulation's not sexy. Maybe you're just not watching the right people do it.
That's a good point.
Let's see what we can do today. You and I might be able to change your mind on that.
That's right. I hope so. Because we should. Because, Jessica, like I've talked to several people now, on the show, and many people will say, that regulation.
People are saying,
that's right. That regulation is more costly to the economy than even the spending and taxes, which usually I'm always thinking about spending as being the main thing. But like John Taylor at Stanford has talked to me about this, and James Brohl, and several other people come at me and say regulations is really where it's happening. Is that kind of you think too?
Well, I do, and I am professionally obligated to as well, because here at CI, one of our flagship products is Clyde Wayne Cruz's 10,000 Commandments.
Yes.
And that attempts to quantify, like, what is the actual cost of all these regulations? And now on top of that, we have what we call here at CI regulatory dark matter. So that's stuff that isn't even official regulation. That's just guidance issued from agencies. So forget about the fact that the agencies aren't elected. These aren't even things that are voted on by the people at the agencies. This is just ideas they have in papers they put out. So Wayne tries to quantify that every year with 10,000 Commandments and break it down for, what is this doing to the whole economy, but also what is this cost per household and all of that. And I think when you say it's a hidden tax, nothing could be more true. And a lot of my colleagues here at CEI have to labor in the minds of these industries that are entrenched in regulation. And I think I get the fun privilege of trying to stand out front and hold space for the industries that haven't been totally overtaken by that, at least on the tech side. Yeah. Antitrust, you get a little more into the legacy, and of course, telecom is nothing but regulation. But on the tech stuff, it's fun because we're kind of always racing the clock, right? Can the market innovate away a lot of these challenges before bureaucrats can get into meddling with them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You spoke about like the total amount of regulatory cost. What's the latest number that they put out?
Well, it's constantly updated. I think we're somewhere around, $16,000 a year.
Yeah.
I'm going to get in trouble if that's not right, per household. But it really is kind of that's a lifestyle changing amount of money for a lot of Americans, right? That's not nothing. That's a big deal. And it doesn't, it's hard to quantify all the costs, right? Because some of that is a lack of innovation. How do you measure that? What we're saying about regulation here and what I say about antitrust is that, it's hard to quantify what you've made impossible to come to fruition. We don't really know how to measure what we've lost in that type of overregulation.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, because I think the overall amount I've heard is like $2 trillion a year, or sometimes $3 trillion. I mean, it's a massive amount of money, and like you said, even going down to each person in each household, just a massive amount. Yeah, because it goes back to Frederick Bastiat's kind of the seen versus the unseen, right? Is we see these regulations, we hear about the minimum wage, we hear about antitrust, but it's a lot of the unseen stuff that's all going back behind the scenes. That's kind of like Wizard of Oz. Making things happen, but really there's not a whole lot back there based on sound economics. They try to make it seem that way, but it oftentimes is not. It's based mostly on, it seems to me anyway, mostly on politics and regulations. And Jessica, like when I was the chief economist for the Office of Management and Budget, we had OIRA within OMB, and I feel like in some sense in the Trump administration, there was a good push for deregulation. I think maybe you or I would like for them to have done more. But at least it was heading in a better direction. But even then you get a lot of pushback. You get all these comments, you get all this stuff on the regulatory side that makes it very difficult to grease those wheels to have less regulation. Is that kind of what you find with some of your work as well?
Oh, for sure. And and also I have a great amount of respect for Americans who are busy living their lives and not paying attention to this. I can't sit here in good conscience and say, well, everyone should, I should recommend 10,000 commandments to everyone. It's wonderful. But people are, they're raising their kids and they're making a living and they're doing their thing. And Americans should be free to spend their time doing those things, right? They shouldn't have to be inundated with all these regulations or having to keep up with all. I mean, no one can keep up with it. No. It's just shocking. And sometimes I think normal people, normal Americans, I say that in the best way as a compliment. They think maybe someone's keeping track of that cost benefit analysis, and I don't think that that's happening these days in any productive way here in Washington. So it's sort of incumbent upon those of us who, for whatever weird reason, enjoy fighting these things, to bring those concerns to light, right? Taxes, people feel it. You see it every year. We all know the pain of paying taxes, but the regulations, they're a little sneaky, right? If you looked in there, you'd be shocked at what you found in almost every aspect of your life. Something is regulated along that line. Yeah,
definitely. And it compounds, right? You have the initial cost, but then all of them together are compounding, because then it's federal regulations, it's state regulations, it's local regulations. It's just one thing after another versus, I'm in here in my house right now in my office, all the regulations of how to build a house and what all electrical things you need in it. And I don't know all this stuff, but they have to abide by those in order to get that, which raises the cost for all of us to be able to afford housing in the process, or other things that we want to do, along with regulations for minimum wages and all this other stuff. So it really is quite fascinating. I think more people should understand. It's one reason why I wanted to talk to you about this, and just talk to you in general, but talk to you about regulations, is that it really is a huge cost. What are some of the regulations, though, Jessica, that keep you up at night, that really get at you whenever you're working or thinking about your family or other things?
I think lately, the regulation, and that's, I'm going to say that and people are going to say, oh, that's not exactly a regulation, that's antitrust law. What the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, is doing right now is a huge expansion of regulating the U.S. economy. You can call it whatever inside the Beltway term you like, but that's what's happening. And those really worry me, because this country, we're not in the most robust economic time, but we're doing so much better than other parts of the world. And for me, it's not a mystery why. When you talk about the regulation of tech companies in this country, people have their complaints with the tech companies and concerns, and those are valid, and we should talk about those policy issues. But it's hard to ignore, and that I think it's either 7 or 8, depending on the day, of the top 10 global tech companies are U.S.-based companies. And Europe, always kind enough to run the counter example for us, doesn't have one on that list, right? And I don't think that that's because Europeans are dumb.
No.
Some of the brightest minds are still on that continent, but I do think you have a great test case of the light touch regulatory environment we've had since really the boom of the internet here in the US, as compared to the EU, whose primary goal appears to be not letting there be any big companies. So what concerns me is a little bit of that goal is starting to pop up here in the US. And I think, that's a real concern because, like I said, you can have your problems with those tech companies, and we can talk about those problems too today.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is what it's done for the U.S. economy, what it's done for people's 401ks, what it's done for innovations in our life about the way we work and learn and play and interact. Again, not without challenges, but for the most part, just amazing innovation, amazing progress, amazing prosperity. And to sacrifice that to, I don't know, I get the feeling they're a little big and it makes me feel weird that they're so big. That's not a serious conversation for adults, but that is the conversation, unfortunately, we're having with a lot of grownups here in Washington right now. And those worry me because it's not just about the cost you pay now. It's really what kind of economy and what kind of world am I expecting my children to inherit?
Yeah. Well put. And we see this a lot. I think there is this kind of common, just thinking about that big is bad, right? They get these businesses that are so. I
think thinking's a generous term to describe the big thinking. I call it more like vibes.
Okay.
Just like bad. It's just bad vibes.
That's a better way to put it. Okay. Those bad vibes of big is bad seems to be in everything, right? Whether it's big tech or big pharma or big whatever, you put the next word on there. There really seems to be this big pushback against those big companies. And so I'm, the latest one, was Google. And this court case out of District Court of DC basically saying that their text engines and their search engines are a monopoly, that they have too much power. And they go through these different reasons of why and everything else. And it just seems like big is bad no matter what. But I don't know. I mean, I use Google search all the time, whether it's on my phone or on my computer or whatever else. And I use it because it gives me good value. I like when I search something, I'm pretty sure that it's going to pop back what I want to look for or something that I'm going to be interested in. And that's why I keep using it. And so something that's just so tough talking to people about big companies and everything else, Jessica, is trying to get them to understand that we as consumers are sovereign. Like we have consumer sovereignty. If you don't like something, just stop using it. Don't push the government into trying to quote unquote solve the problem for us. And so this goes back to the consumer welfare standard. Can you explain some more about the consumer welfare standard and like why it's so important and maybe why we have some of this backwards when we think about just all big businesses are bad?
Yeah. So everyone listening and watching, take a sip of coffee. I'm going to try to keep it interesting, but I got to back up a little bit. So stay with me. We're going to land the plane. It's going to be worth it. Back when antitrust law first started in this country, it was a big mess for a long time. It couldn't decide if it was to protect competitors. Does that protect competition? No, that wasn't quite it. A lot of really weird case law, leading one justice to say the only principle he could find out was that the government always won. So it was a mess for a long time. About 40 years ago, we had Judge Bork was a big part of this, as were many people at Harvard and Chicago. We kind of had an antitrust revolution, and so enters the consumer welfare standard, which says, it's about consumers. If there's not consumer harm in the form of lower output, higher prices, then we don't really have a problem here, right? We're not here to protect competitors because once you start getting involved to protect a competitor, what you really end up doing a lot of times is inadvertently raising the prices for consumers or hurting innovation. So they had a really good instinct there. And now we're seeing that consumer welfare standard challenged again. And the Google case is a great example, right? Like Google does have a very large market share. Kind of depends on how you define that market. A lot of search actually starts in apps like Amazon now. But leaving that aside, the bottom line is it's a really good product. It has a big market share. Having a big market share is not illegal. Being a monopoly isn't illegal. And when you have a situation like we do, where search is, free to change your default, takes a couple clicks. You have other, if you're a privacy enthusiast, enjoy DuckDuckGo.
Yeah.
If you don't want your search results to be as good as Google's, enjoy Bing.
Yeah.
There, I said it. Whatever your preference is, the great part is you get to express your preference. And it is of no cost to you.
Right.
It is right there for you. So this case begs the question, where's the consumer harm? Well, there really doesn't seem to be any consumer harm. And when you talk to people about this case, even people who are following it closely or people who are just, have read about it, what they always come back to when I talk to them is like, well, it's got to be so hard for someone breaking into, and I said, but we're not about the competitors. The consumer welfare standard is about consumers. Consumers king. And that hasn't always been the case with antitrust law in the US, but it sure has been a great development of it. And we're at risk of turning the clock back on that sort of thing. And again, like I said, Europe, always helpful to run the terrible experiment in the wrong direction. They mandated choice screens for browsers and search in the EU. And what do you know? It didn't affect Google's market share at all. So what we know is people probably use Google most because most people prefer Google search.
Who would have thought?
That's bad news. Yeah, it's weird how that worked out. There's probably not some big nefarious scheme with defaults. Defaults when you buy an Apple phone or an Android phone that has a contract, Google pays a lot to have their search be the default. Now, the other side would say they're doing that because something's wrong with the product. It's not good enough. It has to be the default. But I think of that more as because it's so easy to change it. If that were the case, and people when they use a Microsoft laptop, I think the number one search term in Bing, their default is Google because they're about to switch. They're looking to default to Google.
Yeah.
So I think of that default placement as kind of advertising, right? Like I can put an ad in your face all day long everywhere, but if you use a product and you think it stinks, you're not going to come back, especially when it's free and easy to change to a different product, right? Yeah. So, that case will be appealed and we'll see what a different court has to say about it. But I think it's kind of a red flag for us when we say, oh, we can see that the movement away here from putting consumers at the heart of this.
Yeah. I agree with you. And thank you for giving the history as well, even if it get. Yeah.
Well, I hope everyone's still with us.
Yeah. No,
okay, good. I tried it. That was a sprint through history.
It was a good one. You know what else is interesting that might help with the audience too is maybe frustrate some of them. But in my view is in the free market, in the private sector, there are no monopolies. Like they could be as big as they want to be, or we can call them a monopoly, but they're not hurting anyone, to your point, on the consumer welfare or anything like that. To me, what I'm more concerned about is the government failure. The barriers that government puts in place that holds some entities up as a monopoly compared to others, like power utility companies and things of that nature, where they basically ban any competition or make the cost so high to enter into that market that it creates this monopoly situation, which is when you do really have, higher prices, lower quality, because you have nowhere else to turn. Think about public education. Most of the schooling is 90% or plus of kids are having to go to a public school. A lot of our healthcare system. I mean, where the government is creating a lot of these bad situations where we think about as being big is bad. To me, it becomes from the government side of things as government failures, not from market failures. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously government is the big monopolist here. So it's a little rich that they're the ones protecting us from these high market share companies when we all know, creative destruction's at work. I mean, you do want to make sure there's not anything else going on. That's sure. Fine. But for the most part, there usually isn't. Yeah. And if there is, you can almost always trace it back to some government regulation or intervention along the way. I mean, my favorite example of this is AT&T. Mm-hmm. I mean, AT&T kind of birthed the Federal Communications Commission. I mean, they were kind of one fused entity for decades in this country. And before they intervened, we actually had competition in telephone service. But a bunch of politicians decided they didn't really want that. They didn't want replicated lines and competition. What they wanted was universal service. In exchange for that, you get into rate regulation, a lot of things. This entire bureaucratic agency grows up around it. And you kind of have this quasi public private thing that was holding back communications for for decades. And then, that amuses me most when people kind of push back on me and say, well, breaking up companies, great. Look what happened when we broke up AT&T. And I say, look who made AT&T a monopoly. I mean, we could have skipped it and gotten to it a lot quicker and had cell phones faster and, cable, all of that stuff could have been a lot quicker and better. So I think so often when you look at who the real culprit is in distorting markets in a way that harms consumers, it ends up being the government.
Yep. The other big,
a predictable answer from me, but true nonetheless.
The big G, the big government getting in the way.
That's right.
Speaking of big government and getting in the way, something else that I know you've been writing about is on age verification for minors on social media. And there's been different bills that have been out there. Recently, there was the KOSA, Kids Online Safety Act. It was a big deal. I think that one's gotten pushed off, hopefully for a while till next session. Maybe be great to just get rid of it entirely, but at least pushed off. But we're also seeing this at the state levels in Texas, where I live. There's been some big bills to, basically, age verification is a part of it, but almost banning kids from being on social media and in a lot of other ways too. And I'm pretty concerned about this, Jessica, on the direction that things are going. I get this concern, and I've read Jonathan Haidt's new book, Anxious Generation, and his other work that he's had on this. And I will say that I agree with him on a personal level. As a parent, I may want to wait until 16 for my kids to have cell phones and be on social media. I think those are probably good ideas. But I'm really concerned about the government getting more involved. And me as a parent of three young kids right now, how much more dependence am I going to put on politicians and bureaucrats compared to me being able to make the best decisions for my kids? But I wonder, what do you think about some of these things going on?
Yeah, I think that the 30,000 foot view here is not every problem has a policy solution. Yeah. And it's hard for me sometimes because I feel like America has really woken up in a great and positive way to issues like school choice and being more aware and involved in their child's education, and to see a lot of the overlap with people who also want social media regulation for their kids. There's a disconnect there. And I think that, sure, if you're a parent who says, I know my kid, I know our life, and I don't want them to have a phone until they're 16 or 18 or whatever, right. Whatever makes sense. Right. Because that's great because you pay the bills. Yeah. So you can do that. I'm here to remind America's parents, as a fellow parent, you can say no. Yeah. I do it too, frequently. It's unpleasant, but it's the best thing for them in many situations, as everyone knows. Yeah. So you can make that decision. And that's a lot different than a top-down ban that treats every 16-year-old or 15-year-old or 12-year-old the same, right? Because this, like everything else, some kids can handle it and some kids can't. And that changes kid to kid in your family, maybe. That changes year to year with your child. That changes in how present you can be and how much you can stay involved and engaged in what they're doing online, how comfortable you are using all the tools that are available to you in every different stack of the tech world, right? Yep. Your ISP has them. You can download special apps that help you monitor what they're seeing. You can get them a flip phone when they're younger.
A dumb phone.
Right? So you can still, a dumb phone, mean. Flip phone was everything to some of us at the time.
Yeah.
It was great. The texting 3 times on the. Anyway.
Remember the Nokia ones back in the day where you could switch out the faces?
Yeah. I wasn't cool enough to have one. I wasn't a cool girl, but yeah, I remember them being fantastic.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a whole bunch in between banning and just a free for all. First of all, and the other thing I would say about the banning is this is nothing new, right? My parents thought my brain was turning to mush. No comments, please, from the audience, as the accuracy of those predictions. But because of television, right? It was all this garbage television. And there's violent video games, which of course we find out then really don't have any ties to violent behavior in kids, but we were all worried about that. And if you go back further, there were panics about women riding bicycles. And I love this one because the concern was something called wind face. And I just like that females have been under assault for looking weird all through history. so these panics come with something new. We don't know every possible consequence, right? But if you ban things just because you don't know exactly, you can't control for every possible harm that could ever happen, that's the precautionary principle. And that's a real bad idea for innovation and prosperity. Real bad idea.
Yep.
Not good for humanity. Again, thank you, Europe.
Yeah.
We can see it. So, I think parents, listen, it's relatively new for us, all this social media stuff. It's ubiquitous, so it feels like it's been with us forever, but it hasn't been. And I think we're on a learning curve about how do we handle ourselves in our online time? How do we talk to our kids about it? And it's not going to go away. So, you can let your kids in on however much you let the line out at your own pace, but you can't just keep them away from it forever and expect them to go out and become employed.
Yeah.
This is a networking tool that, LinkedIn is going to happen to you too, kiddos. So it probably won't be that by then, but they're going to need to be savvy about how to navigate this. So just like in real life, as a parent, I try to engage with them, keep the lines of communication open, tell them, this is what can happen if you do this online. Always come talk to me. You're not in trouble. I'm here to help you. Like, these are the same conversations we have with our kids about real physical harms in the world. And we need to have that same version of conversation. And there's a lot of resources for parents who need help getting that conversation started. But the bottom line is, just like with schools and what your kids should eat and all that stuff, there's no substitute for engaged parenting. And unfortunately, not everyone has an engaged parent.
Yeah.
But kicking all kids off of social media or asking all of America to turn over their government issued ID isn't going to fix bad parenting, right? It's not the silver bullet that's going to make all this stuff go away. And when you look kind of at a couple different, larger statistical indicators here, there is a mental health concern for youth in this country. Is it down to social media? I'm not convinced. Yeah. We have a world where everyone's telling them the world is going to catch on fire. We had the COVID close down of years that they missed socializing in schools. There's a lot of factors, right, that could be contributing to this. And it probably isn't just one.
We live in a dynamic world, Jessica. So many things,
it's complicated. Right? I mean, you said it. That's right. There's not a one issue problem here, I don't think, with kids' mental health. And I don't think there's a one issue solution, but I do think there's a huge cost to age verification, because to verify that you're not a kid, you're going to have to fork over your adult government ID. And that means the end of anonymity online, which, people kind of want to poo-poo that, but we have a long tradition of protecting anonymous speech in this country, right? The Federalist Papers, a lot of important founding documents were not signed by their authors. And in a time where actually a lot of cancel culture is a concern, I think it's kind of more important than ever to allow some amount in some places for anonymous speech. So you're kind of throwing over a lot of really good, important First Amendment concerns to pretend like you're going to make no kids depressed, or they're never going to want to do, video games or be on Instagram anymore because you're going to make it hard. I don't think that we're having a well-reasoned, rational debate about this. I think that parents are very sincerely concerned. Yeah. It's new. If you have a kid that has a real problem with it, it's a real problem. But a lot of the examples of the problems are sort of problems that happen in the real world. Maybe they're facilitated by some online activity, but I can tell you that, sexual crimes and drug use and underage drinking and all that stuff was happening before Facebook was invented. Yeah. And actually, those real life harms seem to be down. Yeah. So if you're worried about your kid being depressed, I mean, that's a real concern, and we should have that conversation in a productive way. But was it better when I was growing up and people were worried about all of us getting kidnapped, which was also an irrational thing, by the way. But there's always something that parents are worried about because we love our kids. And that's okay, right? But I think that it's driving these measures that don't really fix the problem to be a lot more politically popular than I think they deserve to be.
Yeah, amen. I agree. It also reminds me of the trade-offs, right? Like, as Thomas Sowell, again, there are no solutions.
Thomas Sowell, always a trade-off.
Yep.
There's only
no
trade-offs.
solutions, only trade-offs.
That guy nails it
He
again.
He does. So many good things. And what's interesting, and you kind of hinted at this several times, or even said it explicitly, but what are the trade-offs that are going to go on here? Yeah, yes, they're not on their cell phone inside, not doing things, but I mean, like growing up, I mean, we were outside, which was good. I think we should get kids outside more and playing and doing things and riding bikes. Don't let them inside all day, sort of thing. But there were also like we were getting into a lot of problems, and it was hot outside. I don't know. There was just a lot of things that were going on.
You had to drink from the hose.
Yeah.
We were all. I know we weren't hydrated.
Right.
There's no way we were as hydrated as our children are now. No, that's right. Like I'm not making light of the bad things that do happen online. Those need to be addressed. Right. And for the record, the things that are illegal in the real world are also very illegal online. Yep. But when we talk about bullying online, when I grew up, you actually like got punched on the playground, which is a concern. But we didn't ban playgrounds. Right. We were trying to not let kids go to school because they would have a rough time. I think that the best thing, is to be in communication with your children. And nobody likes that answer because it's a lot of work. And I am a tired parent. I get it. I always have laundry to do. Why is there so much laundry? Yeah. Oh my gosh, we have to have dinner every night. I'm with you, America. But I can tell you that you're going to do a much better job educating your kids, being emotionally supportive of your kids, raising good digital citizens than the federal or state government is going to do for you. I can promise you.
Definitely. And the less free speech, like you talked about First Amendment, so many different factors that this goes into. And at the end of the day, like kids are going to have online tools for them for the rest of their lives. And it's probably going to be even more connected with us as time goes on. That's what we've seen so far. And so if we're holding them back from starting in, it's almost like holding them back from getting their first job. Not quite, but it's holding them back from being able to move up the income ladder. This way is something else that's going to hold them back from some kids who are going to be online versus them not being online. They're going to be at a disservice for getting into maybe college or trade school or getting a job later on. It could influence them in a lot of ways. And so I think, like you're saying, I think we need to be really careful about policymakers going into this because we're afraid of something. They're so good about banning things that we're afraid of or locking people up they're afraid of versus having some compassion and understanding that people are all different. We're all unique in some way, especially our kids. And it's your point. It's tough enough trying to parent in so many ways, much less with this. I would rather government, and maybe there is a role here, to provide more information. I would like think tanks. I know you're doing good about this as well, but maybe there is some information that can be provided that parents can understand and learn what's going on. But moving to banning things just is never a good idea. And what's interesting here, Jessica, is that so much of it is coming from the right. Like we're hearing all this banning I say the right, that's coming from them, which typically they're for more freedom and liberty. And I don't know if this is the new right and this is kind of a national conservatism that's all moving forward, which scares me. And I've talked about this a lot on the show. But like, where do you think some of this is going now when we think about big tech and kind of putting all this together in our closing here? How can we start to think about this more holistically to allow for freedom and liberty and innovation and technology to set forth for us to have an economic revolution for the future?
Yeah. So I like to think that, I just want to remind people like we're at an advantage here to win in a world of competing ideas and personal responsibility because we're right.
Yeah.
We are in line with human nature, right? The best part is the most realistic. Capitalism takes the darker sides of humanity and uses them for good. Parents are the best stewards of their children, not the state. Like these are good ideas that will prove to be true, that will bear out to be fruitful. And we should keep advocating for that as opposed to saying, well, we want to be the ones in control to force what our version is. Yeah. You don't need to do that when you're right? As I like to say, it doesn't count if you have to force someone to do it. Right. Within limits, obviously. Sure. But, we have a really good case to be made about this. And on that end of the social media stuff for kids, they're, like you said, they're going to need these tools going forward. Use this as an opportunity to educate your kid, to be communicative with your kid, to get to know your kid better about where they're spending their time online, just like you do about where they are in the real world. The trade-offs that you are handing over all this private information for verification, that you're impinging on free speech, those are not good long-term bets. The good long-term bet is on raising your kid in your house with your rules. You and I won't have the same rules. You and I don't have the same kids.
Yep.
That's okay. That's why this whole secular society thing works, right? Because we don't have to be regulated into agreeing on every finer point of our lives. We can say, okay, we agree on some big major ideas that keep us safe and moving forward. And we leave the details up to each other in a respectful way, right?
Yeah.
Just like we don't have to agree on where you go to church or don't go to church or, what values you're teaching your kids. It's the same thing online. And if people think that keeping their kids from social media is like going to benefit them in the long run, I have some bad news, right?
Yeah.
Social media is a reflection of what society is. It's like holding a mirror up to us. These things that they're going to encounter in the real world too. So you might as well just go whole hog, get it all out there and set them up to be successful people who can navigate these things. It's only going to get more complicated. I'm not going to deny that. Yeah. But we can do it, right? We are human beings. We are Americans. And I'm hopeful that we can figure all this out, without degrading our First Amendment rights or the privacy of our children, and continue to keep them safer all the time. We can do this going forward, but just shutting the whole thing down is, it won't fix a lot of problems, and it will cost a great deal.
Yeah, I agree. Well, this has been a great conversation, Jessica. Thank you for all you do, and God bless you and your family. And where's the best place for people to find you?
CEI.org. Okay. That's where we are. And there's a whole page of parental tools, by the way, online there on our front page. But we're all here. Come see us sometime, everyone. Yeah, that sounds great. Well, thanks again. And I'll make sure to put all those in the show notes page as well. Thank you again, Jessica. It's really been a pleasure talking with you today. Oh, it's been such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for having me. What fun. Yes, definitely. Well, for the audience, thank you for joining us today. Give us a 5-star rating and share this with all your friends and family as they can understand more about regulations, big tech, social media, and so much more. And you can find all this information and more at vanceginn.com or the show notes at vanceginn.substack.com. And until next time, let people prosper.